Welcome to the Whole Pack, where we challenge black and white thinking and holistic pet care and dive into the controversial topics everyone's thinking about but nobody's saying out loud. I'm Sunny Gandera.
And I'm Melissa Sherman, and we are two holistic pet health practitioners here to prove that holistic care can include critical thinking, self-care, and yes, even Western medicine when needed. This is a judgment-free community we wish we'd had when we started our journey. Welcome back. We're on episode 6, and today we're going to talk about compassion fatigue. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I don't even know where to start with it because there's just so many things to talk about. But what it is it's essentially burnout, but it's emotional burnout that you may experience when you're supporting people and you're really emotionally invested. And then on the other side of that, you might not be taking care of yourself. You have stuff going on in your own life. And whether you're a veterinarian, a health coach, a nutritionist, or an animal communicator, anything in between, we're holding space for people. We're listening to something that may be very stressful to them, whether their animal isn't healthy, or they're looking at their animal that is at the end of life, and we're emotionally holding that as well. That can take a toll on us. And it's not, it can be a little bit about boundaries, but it's more than that. We're going to get into that in this episode. So, Sunny, how does this show up for you? Like, what is your first indicator that you may be going over the edge into compassion fatigue?
Yeah, this is also a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And I think that, when I find that I get irritable or impatient, or I don't even want to open my email because maybe I have a, email from a client who's saying that their dog's getting worse, or maybe there's something that I feel overwhelmed to tackle, right? Like it's almost like I'm forgetting the why behind what I do, and I'm getting stuck in sort of in my business of like, now I've got to write this email and now I've got to get back to this. Oh my gosh, I have another consultation. And that, of course, is not who I am, right? I got into this because I'm super passionate about helping animals and their pet parents and really putting myself in the pet parent's position. So, it can also be physical, right? I mean, you can get headaches, you can get, sometimes I get like a stiff neck, or, there are definite signs that I'm not taking care of myself mentally or physically. And I have a tendency to, everyone else is more important than myself. And when I start to lose track of that, I need to take care of myself also. That's when I know that I'm just overwhelmed and I'm just trying to survive, keep my head above water. And I think we've all been there. And sometimes it almost shows up as an imposter syndrome, which is strange too. It's almost like I wasn't cut out for this, and it's just too much. And then I start to get all these negative thoughts. And that's when you know that you need to step back and just, take a break. And for us, it's really hard because we're so, almost want to say, desperate to help people, right? But at the end of the day, we also need time off. And especially important for us in who care for others and who are holding space, as you were saying, right? So it can show up very differently for everybody. I would just urge you to pay attention to: are you behaving differently? Are you impatient? Are you short? Are you irritable? That's how I know that I'm definitely stretched too thin.
Yeah, those are really good points. The first time I heard this term is when I was I was volunteering at a high kill shelter. Um, and I had never heard this before. It's a lot. You're taking on a lot. You're seeing a lot of high trauma cases or animal hoarding cases, and it's emotionally tolling. Now, I only volunteered once a week, but there were people that were working there 5, 6, 7 days a week. And you could just see it on their faces. You could see it in their body, their posture. Um, there's just something that we turn off when our emotions get overloaded. We turn off, and then the thing that we started out loving and we found so much joy in, um, there's just this detachment because it hurts too much to keep doing it. So, of course, that's an extreme case because you're dealing literally with life and death. However, in our own practices, many times we're dealing with situations where it is life or death for that animal. Or, we've mentioned that in previous episodes that whether it's our coaching business or the animal communication business, they've tried everything. They are at the last thread of hope. They still have hope. And then our role is to still, lift that hope up. So we have to have that within us to be able to give that to them. So
Right.
when we're completely depleted, we can't even show up 100% for them. And it is so vital that we're able to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, especially those that are in rescue and, we don't think about that, right, as often as we should, but that is a really tough job. And I just take my hat off everyone in that field because it is such difficult work. I mean, and I think that, compassion fatigue isn't talked about enough because it's almost as if we are embarrassed to admit it. But, like you were saying, when we stop feeling or when we just kind of sometimes, someone's telling you an emotional story and you just kind of go blank, it's that it's not because we don't care. It's the body's automatic response to protect you. And that's when perhaps that it's time to take a step back, take a break, reassess, and be kind to yourself too. Because compassion fatigue means that you need to be compassionate to yourself also, not just to other people.
Yeah. And, some people say it's the cost of caring and, kind of dismiss it like this is just what it is. And most of us that are in this are extremely nurturing people to begin with. So it's hard for us to ask for help, but we love supporting others, right? But that's where we have to have that internal boundary of how do we take care of ourselves? And, if you start feeling numb or detached from your work or you're losing that spark, that joy where you're not getting up. I mean, when I have a lot going on in my own life, there are days where I'm like, I don't know, I don't know if I could be doing this. Maybe I should just get a job. Like there's that talk that you
Right.
have with yourself where you're like, whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
There is no truth to that. So
Yeah.
before you go and get a job, like stop and say, is there really truth to that? Or have I pushed myself over the edge? Because in no timeline in the future do I want to go get a job. I'd love to continue working with animals in the capacity that I am. So that's when I know like, oh gosh, I really pushed myself over and feeling hopeless or you may like you said physical. You may have backaches, headaches, trouble sleeping, you become irritable, you don't have patience, whether it doesn't necessarily have to be with your clients, it could be with your friends, your family, your
Yeah.
colleagues that you're like, "Whoa, why do I have so much I'm so irritable all of a sudden?" And then definitely the losing joy because it's something that you truly love doing. Where did it go? And that's really just that emotional toll of have you been taking care of yourself? So, why I guess we've talked about why this happens, but and then, you hear about this with healthcare workers too. I think a lot of people kind of heard about this term for the first time too during COVID, right? Because that's when the healthcare workers were working around the clock and they were seeing so much scary stuff that they just were shutting down emotionally so they could get through the emergency. And then what does that do? That causes PTSD down the road too. When you come out of that survival, you go more into PTSD. Now, most of us in our practices are not at that level of experiencing trauma every day, but veterinarians are. They're on the front lines, right? Vet techs as well, and then rescue workers as well are going to see that level of trauma day in and day out. So, I think Sunny, you shared a really interesting story about your veterinarian, and it really it made me pause because I think veterinarians a lot of times get accused of not having great bedside manner, or they're really dry and they're just not. They seem like they lack compassion. That's a really good indicator that they might be experiencing this, but, the story that you shared about your vet, if you wanna share that, that was I think it was just so insightful of what
Yeah.
one appointment might be to the next.
Yeah, and this hadn't even thought of that myself, as insightful as I think I am, about veterinarians and everything else. But I had just gotten my puppy Oslo, and he was 8 weeks old, and I was super excited to bring him in for his first checkup, right? And when I came in, there was a candle, which really tells you that, there is a dog transitioning or a pet transitioning. So there's a euthanasia happening. And, I was like, oh my gosh, here I come, all excited about my new puppy. And then this poor veterinarian has to, say goodbye to a client. And she's also really loves her clients and very passionate. And then she has to kind of turn that off and come into my room, be all, yay, excited, new puppy. And that's within like 5 minutes, right? You may not even get 5 minutes from death to birth, so to speak. And that's just really hit me. And I just said to her, because I'm very familiar with my vet, I'm friends with her too. And I just said, I gave her a big hug, saying, I'm so sorry. And she just started crying. And she's like, yeah, she's like, this is my life. And many vets, they spend maybe up to 60% of their time euthanizing animals. And so we do have to put ourselves in their position, how difficult it is for them, how many different situations they have to adapt to. So no wonder, there is maybe a time when your vet seems distant or not as friendly, but you have to remember what may they have been through right before they saw you. So that again is about like tapping into our compassion, seeing it from other, viewpoints, and not just jumping to conclusions because they weren't perfect with me. So I always think about that now when I go in, and I'm very considerate about, what's going on around us. And we do have to be human and take care of each other. And there is a reason why there's a high suicide rate among veterinarians. I mean, you can only imagine, yeah, it asks a lot of a human being to do this type of work. So
Because
yeah.
there's something culturally about being professional that we're not allowed to show emotions. We're not allowed to have emotions. It's almost like we're being asked to be professional. You're almost asked to not be human. Um, I'd love if that changed. We're not going to culturally change that right now, but like that would be a dream of mine that doctors and veterinarians, everybody could just be a human and walk into a room and I'm having a really hard day. Just give me a second. And, like we could talk through it instead of just having to put a face on, because I think that really does take a toll on our nervous systems that we have to like, hey, everything's fine. And it's
Yeah, of
not.
course. It's
Yeah.
such hard work. And, another thing that popped up for me too, and that's true for me, I know I feel it, and I'm sure a lot of veterinarians feel it, and which is why compassion fatigue happens also, is the guilt. Like, if I don't get back to someone who texts me at midnight, what if the dog needs me? What if it's an emergency and I'm terrible if I don't help them? But, the truth is that animal needs me to function next month more than they need me to respond to maybe a non-urgent text at midnight. But it's that guilt that like, well, this is my job. I'm supposed to be there 24/7. And I think veterinarians might feel that too, because they're in a position of, in a way, of authority where they have a specialty that nobody else has. So I'm the only one that can help, right? So I think we have to really like put that in perspective and say, I'm only human. I can only do so much. I can only work a certain amount of hours a day before I'm just tapped out and I'm not of good to anyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Um, so what do you do about it? I mean, what do you do about it if you start feeling like you're going that way? Or what can we do about it to prevent it in the first place? Because ideally, that's what we want to do. Of course, again, we are humans. So there are going to be days because we do truly care. So that's why sometimes those boundaries get blurred a little bit because we really do care. And we're going to push ourselves a little more than maybe we should. But what do you have, like, anything personal that you do if, like, you start seeing the warning signs that it's catching up with you?
Yeah, I mean, and we'll also talk about obviously how to avoid compassion
How
fatigue
to
from
avoid it,
happening.
yeah.
But before that, if I do notice, usually there are several things I haven't been doing, and I'm terrible. So I won't say that I'm like a model citizen for this, but it will always be I've eaten unhealthy. I haven't taken time to eat the right amount, food. So I will try to set aside an hour to just like at least prepare meals for the week or something like that. Go out in nature. And that always, helps me because I reconnect, even just looking at a tree can be really peaceful for me. And remembering going, like connecting back to my why. So Another thing is getting enough sleep, of course, is very important. I know we talked about it. Sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night and we think about a client, and just making sure that we are set up for a good night's rest, like not being on the phone. Guilty, but like sometimes right before we fall asleep or watching TV, something like maybe a murder mystery or something, right? So, but taking care of yourself is paramount, right? Like, I mean, it could be as simple as just doing a small meditation if you're not into doing like heavy workouts, but at least like just doing meditation, even if it's just for 5 minutes. I mean, that's almost only the only thing that the nervous system needs is just a few minutes of reset,
Yeah.
and just to kind of try to clear your mind, things like that. Hugging your own animals, being appreciative of their presence, that can really reconnect you with your why as well. And just looking at them, how good they are at being in the present and not worrying. So our animals are our biggest teachers, I think, and they will remind you why you were put in this position, in this place, first and foremost. So yeah, some simple things, but I'm sure. What do you do? Because I know you're good at finding these things that will kind of remove you from the scenario you're in, and just gotten a lot of help from you in terms of routines that we can do. So I'd love to hear your input
Yeah,
as well.
so if I feel myself getting to that point, the first thing I do is I take my shoes off and I go outside. Sometimes, I mean, it sounds crazy, but sometimes I will lay down, whether it's face down or on my back, and just really, I mean, if you have a dog and you've ever seen your dog do that like back roll shimmy, I mean, seriously, learn from the best. And I shake. I'll shake like the dogs too. Like I'll shake my arms. Dancing is a great thing that helps. It lifts my mood. Singing, humming, um, they all feel like weird when you first start doing it, but they really do something to just kind of trip your nervous system back into where you're like, maybe not all the way back into parasympathetic. Maybe you're not completely in rest and digest, but it breaks that like where that buildup, I guess, where you start to come back down. But that's when I start looking at my diet. Am I eating okay? Maybe I have too much sugar, too many carbs, something is, it's fueling the stress rather than, fresh vegetables and fruits. So those are some of the things I do to kind of break it when I see that I'm starting to trend up to burnout, right? And then what I like to do to prevent it in the first place, which is ideal. Life is stressful, though. Things happen in our own lives that are unpredictable, even more so than what's happening in our clients' lives, because we can't always control what's happening in our lives. So I have a routine, which I never in my life thought I would do, but I start every morning before the sun rises, before any of the dogs are awake. And I just started doing qigong, so that's really fun.
Oh, cool.
Moving my body has really been helping. And it's not about doing exercise. I do walk a lot too. Um, but I start in meditation. I do an energy session on myself and starting to do the qigong. And then I walk a few times during the day, with my dogs and sometimes without my dogs. It just depends where I'm at mentally. Because if I'm a little stressed, I'm not going to bring them and make them bask in my stress, right? Like I'm going to release that myself. Um, but those things really help. So really having a routine, whether it's in the morning, the middle of the day, or in the evening, whatever works best for you and your schedule, stick to it. Give yourself that time, whether you call it me time, whether you just schedule it into your day. It is so important because that is the first thing. If you don't prioritize yourself, you're going to pay the price. And then your clients will pay the price because you can't show up for them 100%.
I think another thing I'm thinking, and as you're speaking now, like what I would like to do is maybe put up a list either on your fridge or something of like those things that we just talked about. Like these are the things you can do once you start to, oh my gosh. Because I know myself when I'm in the middle of it, I don't know what am I supposed to do? Like lay down, shake, go out for a walk. So if you have that list, I think it would be good, like, oh, that feels really good right now. I'm going to do that. It may sound a little trite, but I think that would be really helpful because that is also a reminder how important it is to nip it in the bud, so to speak, before it gets really bad, right? Because that can happen.
It can. Yeah, no, that's a really good point because if you start to, get a little anxious, we forget everything. We forget all of our tools, right? Then it is harder to pick it out. So
So,
the list on the refrigerator is gold. I mean, that's a great idea.
yeah, absolutely. So, what do we do then to prevent it from happening in the first place? Of course, it inevitably will happen to all of us because we aren't perfect and we're not always very like scheduled. But, there are certain things that I think we should set up as golden rules for our practice, for our life, so that we can at least minimize the risk of this happening. And then, at the end of the day, who's going to suffer? Yes, we are suffering, but also, who we're trying to serve if we're always in a constant state of overwhelm or compassion fatigue. So, how do we prevent it? What can we do in our everyday life to sort of, yeah, again, just kind of try to take care of ourselves as much as possible? Do you have any good tips for us, Melissa?
Prioritizing self-care. So like I said, non-negotiable, you have to have some kind of self-care routine, and it doesn't have to be like my morning routine at all. It could be a bubble bath in the evening, reading a book. Whatever self-care looks like to you. Maybe it's giving yourself a facial in the evening. Um, you know, Also a community. Find peer support because it's really important that we have each other to talk to. I think, that's one of the things that brought us together is as an entrepreneur, if you're doing this alone, it's very lonely. And sometimes things feel bigger. Well, they are bigger than us. They're much bigger than us. And if you have to carry all that weight alone, it can suffocate you. So having a community, having peers, whether that's on Facebook, if you do a meetup group, if you have a local community. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you can build a community. Um, we're trying to build a community so we can talk about these things with more people too. So I think that's good. And then practice empathy without becoming self-absorbed in it. Like, you can have empathy, you can care, you can have compassion. You don't have to take it on and make it yours. It's not yours. So that's not empathy. When you start to take on the emotional weight that other people are carrying, that's a whole nother beast, but that will burn you out really fast. So it's not about lacking empathy at all, because you can hold space, you can listen, and you can have empathy. But you have to just make sure at the end of that, okay, that's theirs. And, I do a lot of energy work, so I'm really big into like cleansing and cord cutting, and I do that after every session too. So again, I'm not it's not being dismissive in any way because I've heard practitioners say like, "Yeah, but they told me all that, so like I have to hold that." No, you held space. You made a safe container for them to tell you that, to hold that. You're guiding them. It is not yours. That is not yours to carry. Like, if we carried everybody's emotional weight, oh my gosh. And that's what a lot of us wind up doing, right? Is we take it on and then we worry like it's our own and it's not. So having that, being able to cut the cord and say, okay, now I can show up for the next client. I'll do a smoke cleanse or I will do a cord cutting exercise depending on what it was.
Hmm. Yeah, when you were talking, I was thinking about how important it is to also do some personal development work on yourself because many of us come from, including myself, come from a situation where we were basically like very, very aware of maybe a parent's behavior and we got super sensitive and we took on everything that wasn't ours. And if you don't handle that and become aware of it, you'll bring that into your practice. So becoming self-aware and working on yourself, I think, is really important. And that's hard work, and that doesn't stop. That's something that happens every day. It's like going to the gym, right? Like you don't just
Yeah.
go for 2 weeks and then you're fit for life, right? So,
Right.
and another thing I wanted to talk about too, in terms of like how you can prevent compassion fatigue, is boundaries. I know we talk about that all the time, but it is so important. And ever since I install boundaries. It's almost like, teaching a child, right? I mean, they just have to get used to when you're available, what you are available for, and they will adjust, believe me. But many practitioners think like, no, I have to be available 24/7 and do whatever. And I can just work with, like, I'm also a dog walker, right? Sometimes I do a little bit of dog walking in my neighborhood. Just to get out behind the computer and just be with dogs because that's who I love, right? And so there was a new potential client that called me the other day and she's like, yeah, and what's your rate? Is that something we can agree upon? And I'm like, no, these are my rates. I mean, because the thing is like, if you say, okay, I'll do it for $10 less, but then you're going to go into it with resentment. And that's when the compassion fatigue starts to be like, "Ugh, I'm doing this for free practically. And you're not even going to notice that beautiful dog you're walking, right? Because you're just irritated. So boundaries, I'm telling you, and it may feel like you were saying with empathy and cutting the cords and cleansing after each. It doesn't mean that you're not empathetic. It doesn't mean that you don't want to help, but you have to have these rules and regulations, so to speak, for yourself to protect yourself so that you can show up in the best possible way and be of most help, right?
Yeah, it's like boundaries are a part of self-compassion and self-care because they are to help you show up. I mean, that's one of the most draining things is when we don't have boundaries or we constantly don't honor what our boundaries are. And like you said, it leads to other things like resentment or you're really tired and you're not valuing yourself or your work, and, like, that feels kinda crappy too because
Wow.
the second you discount yourself, you're undervaluing yourself, which is, like, a whole 'nother topic, right?
Yeah, think about it. Like if you are like, nope, this is what I'm going to charge, and this feels really exciting to me. And then people pay that, and you're like, oh my God, I love my work. But if you're going to be, and that's not to say you're overcharging, you're just charging what you feel like. I have a lot of certification. I spent a lot of money on my education. I read and study all day long, that's worth something. That's what they're paying for. So they don't have to do it. Right. So,
Right.
but if you, on the other hand, take on something for less than, then you're just like, do I really want to do this? Is this worth it? So, feel into that. Right. Every
Right.
time. And so that's why I'm saying like, I feel like if you abide to the, whatever boundaries, and everyone has different boundaries and right, it doesn't have to be a set thing. I think you'll experience a lot less of that, those
Right.
problematic emotions that come in.
I agree. Yeah.
Mm.
So just, I guess to wrap up this episode, there's some cliche things like the oxygen mask on yourself first, or you can't pour from an empty cup. I know they're cheesy, but maybe you have to repeat them until you get it, right? Because I hated those, but you can't pour from an empty cup is such a visual to me that I remind myself, and it's almost like I roll it myself, but you can't drain yourself.
No.
And, you can't constantly be refilling everybody else and you have nothing. You're at some point, you'll just be burnt out.
Yeah.
And emotional burnout is really it's tough. It's tough to recover from. So the best ways are preventing it by having some kind of, self-care routine, whether it's a daily routine or whatever, you have something that you're taking care of yourself, no distractions, no phones, no client calls, no social media. That's a big
Right.
one.
Big
But
one.
really have boundaries for yourself with the technology as well as, boundaries within your business. And recognizing compassion fatigue early. So recognizing what that looks like in yourself and, stopping it as soon as you start to see it. What do I need to do? Do I need to take a day off? Whatever that is that you need to do to stop yourself from going over the edge. Because the last thing you want to do is become detached with your work because we
Yeah.
we all care so much, and that's what we bring. That's a lot of the value of what we bring is we do really care about the animals that we work with as if they were our own.
Yes.
So we want to show up for them in the best way without resentment, without exhaustion.
And taking time off, not to interrupt, but that is something I wanted to talk about earlier, but just really
Yes.
quick. As a Norwegian living in the United States, you Americans suck at taking time off. And, we are working. There was something, there was some sort of, joke saying that, the Americans taking time off. They're like, I'm at the operating table about to get cut into, but I'll get back to you in 20 minutes. And then you have someone who's like stumped a toe in Norway and they're like, I have to take 4 weeks off to mend, like something like that. But, point is that doesn't have to be that extreme, but taking time off, taking a week off, I know that can be scary. Like, well, if I don't work, I don't get paid. But you know what? If you're working at that stage, you might not even get any clients, right? So
Yeah.
taking time off is super important. And not to make everyone feel bad about this episode either, like, oh my gosh, I am doing everything wrong. Because if you are running on empty now, you're not failing, but you're feeling, right? And feeling is what makes you good at this work. But like Melissa
Yeah.
said, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. So if you need any help or any support or you have any questions about what we talked about, please reach out and we can help with resources or, point you to some communities that can help. You have anything else, Sunny?
No, just like you said, we want to hear from you listeners. Are you experiencing compassion fatigue? What helps you stay in this work? What makes you want to walk away? Tell us everything. We're listening. And thanks again for tuning into this episode. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Before we go, we want to remind you that the information shared on the whole pack is for educational purposes only and is not intended to replace veterinary medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your veterinarian before making any changes to your pet's diet, supplements, or healthcare routine. Every animal is unique, and what works for one may not be appropriate for another. We're here to empower you with knowledge, but your vet is your partner in your pet's individual care.